All the prisoners on account of witchcraft were set free. But the innocent dead could not be restored to life, and the hill where they were executed will always remind people of the saddest and most humiliating passage in our history." Grandfather then said, that the next remarkable event, while Sir William Phipps remained in the chair, was the arrival at Boston of an English fleet, in 1693. It brought an army, which was intended for the conquest of Canada. But a malignant disease, more fatal than the smallpox, broke out among the soldiers and sailors, and destroyed the greater part of them. The infection spread into the town of Boston, and made much havoc there. This dreadful sickness caused the governor, and Sir Francis Wheeler, who was commander of the British forces, to give up all thoughts of attacking Canada. Soon after this, said grandfather, Sir William Phipps quarrelled with the captain of an English frigate, and also with the collector of Boston. Being a man of violent temper, he gave each of them a sound beating with his cane. "He was a bold fellow," observed Charlie, who was himself somewhat addicted to a similar mode of settling disputes. "More bold than wise," replied grandfather, for complaints were carried to the king, and Sir William Phipps was summoned to England, to make the best answer he could. Accordingly he went to London, where, in 1695, he was seized with a malignant fever, of which he died. Had he lived longer, he would probably have gone again in search of sunken treasure. He had heard of a Spanish ship, which was cast away in 1502, during the lifetime of Columbus. Bovadilla, Roldan, and many other Spaniards, were lost in her, together with the immense wealth of which they had robbed the South American kings. "Why, grandfather," exclaimed Lawrence, "what magnificent ideas the governor had! Only think of recovering all that old treasure, which had lain almost 2 centuries under the sea. Methinks Sir William Phipps ought to have been buried in the ocean, when he died, so that he might have gone down among the sunken ships, and cargoes of treasure, which he was always dreaming about in his lifetime. He was buried in one of the crowded cemeteries of London," said grandfather. As he left no children, his estate was inherited by his nephew, from whom is descended the present Marquis of Normandy. The noble Marquis is not aware, perhaps, that the prosperity of his family originated in the successful enterprise of a New England ship carpenter. Chapter 3. At the death of Sir William Phipps, preceded grandfather, our chair was bequeathed to Mr. Ezekiel Cheever, a famous school master in Boston. This old gentleman came from London in 1637, and had been teaching school ever since, so that there were now aged men, grandfathers like myself, to whom Master Cheever had taught their alphabet. He was a person of venerable aspect, and wore a long white beard. "Was the chair placed in his school?" asked Charlie. "Yes, in his school," answered grandfather, "and we may safely say that it had never before been regarded with such awful reverence, no, not even when the old governors of Massachusetts sat in it. Even you, Charlie, my boy, would have felt some respect for the chair, if you had seen it occupied by this famous schoolmaster." And here grandfather endeavored to give his auditors an idea how matters were managed in schools above 100 years ago. As this will probably be an interesting subject to our readers, we shall make a separate sketch of it, and call it The Old-Fashioned School. Now imagine yourselves, my children, in Master Ezekiel Cheever's schoolroom. It is a large, dingy room, with a sanded floor, and is lighted by windows that turn on hinges, and have little diamond-shaped panes of glass. The scholars sit on long benches, with desks before them. At one end of the room is a great fireplace, so very spacious, that there is room enough for 3 or 4 boys to stand in each of the chimney corners. This was the good old fashion of fireplaces, when there was wood enough in the forests to keep people warm, without their digging into the bowels of the earth for coal. It is a winter's day when we take our peep into the schoolroom. See what great logs of wood have been rolled into the fireplace, and what a broad, bright blaze goes leaping up the chimney. And every few moments, a vast cloud of smoke is puffed into the room, which sails slowly over the heads of the scholars, until it gradually settles upon the walls and ceiling. They are blackened with the smoke of many years already. Next, look at our old historic chair. It is placed, you perceive, in the most comfortable part of the room, where the generous glow of the fire is sufficiently felt, without being too intensely hot. How stately the old chair looks, as if it remembered its many famous occupants, but yet were conscious that a greater man is sitting in it now. Do you see the venerable schoolmaster, severe in aspect, with a black skull cap on his head, like an ancient Puritan, and the snow of his white beard drifting down to his very girdle? What boy would dare to play, or whisper, or even glance aside from his book, while Master Cheever is on the lookout, behind his spectacles? For such offenders, if any such there be, a rod of birch is hanging over the fireplace, and a heavy ferule lies on the master's desk. And now school is begun. What a murmur of multitudinous tongues, like the whispering leaves of a wind-stirred oak, as the scholars con over their various tasks. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Amid just such a murmur has Master Cheever spent above 60 years, and long habit has made it as pleasant to him as the hum of a bee-hive, when the insects are busy in the sunshine. Now a class in Latin is called to recite. Forth steps a row of queer-looking little fellows, wearing square-skirted coats, and small clothes, with buttons at the knee. They look like so many grandfathers in their second childhood. These lads are to be sent to Cambridge, and educated for the learned professions. Old Master Cheever has lived so long, and seen so many generations of school boys grow up to be men, that now he can almost prophesy what sort of a man each boy will be. One urchin shall hereafter be a doctor, and administer pills and potions, and stalk gravely through life, perfumed with osif o tida. Another shall wrangle at the bar, and fight his way to wealth and honours, and in his declining age, shall be a worshipful member of His Majesty's Council. A third, and he is the Master's favourite, shall be a worthy successor to the old Puritan ministers, now in their graves. He shall preach with great unction and effect, and leave volumes of sermons, in print and manuscript, for the benefit of future generations. But, as they are merely school boys now, their business is to construe Virgil. Poor Virgil, whose verses, which he took so much pains to polish, have been mis-scanned, and mis-parsed, and misinterpreted, by so many generations of idle school boys. There, sit down, ye Latinists. 2 or 3 of you, I fear, are doomed to feel the Master's ferule. Next comes a class in arithmetic. These boys are to be the merchants, shopkeepers, and mechanics, of a future period. Hitherto, they have traded only in marbles and apples. Hereafter, some will send vessels to England for broadcloths and all sorts of manufactured wares, and to the West Indies for sugar, and rum, and coffee. Others will stand behind counters, and measure tape, and ribbon, and cambric, by the yard. Others will upheave the blacksmith's hammer, or drive the plane over the carpenter's bench, or take the lapstone and the awl, and learn the trade of shoemaking. Many will follow the sea, and become bold, rough sea captains. This class of boys, in short, must supply the world with those active, skilful hands, and clear, sagacious heads, without which the affairs of life would be thrown into confusion, by the theories of studious and visionary men. Wherefore, teach them their multiplication table, good Master Cheever, and whip them well, when they deserve it, for much of the country's welfare depends on these boys. But, alas, while we have been thinking of other matters, Master Cheever's watchful eye has caught 2 boys at play. Now we shall see awful times. The 2 malefactors are summoned before the Master's chair, wherein he sits, with the terror of a judge upon his brow. Our old chair is now a judgment seat. Ah, Master Cheever has taken down that terrible birch rod. Short is the trial, the sentence quickly passed, and now the judge prepares to execute it in person. Thwack, thwack, thwack. In those good old times, a schoolmaster's blows were well laid on. See, the birch rod has lost several of its twigs, and will hardly serve for another execution. Mercy on us, what a bellowing the urchins make! My ears are almost deafened, though the clamour comes through the far length of 150 years. There, go to your seats, poor boys, and do not cry, sweet little Alice, for they have ceased to feel the pain, a long time since. And thus the forenoon passes away. Now it is 12 o'clock. The Master looks at his great silver watch, and then with tiresome deliberation, puts the ferule into his desk. The little multitude await the word of dismissal, with almost irrepressible impatience. "You are dismissed," says Master Cheever. The boys retire, treading softly until they have passed the threshold, but, fairly out of the school-room, lo, what a joyous shout, what a scampering and trampling of feet, what a sense of recovered freedom, expressed in the merry uproar of all their voices. What care they for the ferule and birch rod now? Were boys created merely to study Latin and arithmetic? No, the better purposes of their being are to sport, to leap, to run, to shout, to slide upon the ice, to snowball. Happy boys! Enjoy your playtime now, and come again to study, and to feel the birch rod and the ferule, tomorrow, not till tomorrow, for today is Thursday lecture, and ever since the settlement of Massachusetts, there has been no school on Thursday afternoons. Therefore, sport, boys, while you may, for the morrow cometh, with the birch rod and the ferule, and after that, another morrow, with troubles of its own. Now the Master has set everything to rights, and is ready to go home to dinner. Yet he goes reluctantly. The old man has spent so much of his life in the smoky, noisy, buzzing school-room, that, when he has a holiday, he feels as if his place were lost, and himself a stranger in the world. But, forth he goes, and there stands our old chair, vacant and solitary, till good Master Cheever resumes his seat in it tomorrow morning." "Grandfather," said Charlie, "I wonder whether the boys did not use to upset the old chair, when the schoolmaster was out." "There is a tradition," replied grandfather, "that one of its arms was dislocated, in some such manner. But I cannot believe that any schoolboy would behave so naughtily." As it was now later than little Alice's usual bedtime, grandfather broke off his narrative, promising to talk more about Master Cheever and his scholars, some other evening. Chapter 4. Accordingly the next evening, grandfather resumed the history of his beloved chair. Master Ezekiel Cheever, said he, died in 1707, after having taught school about 70 years. It would require a pretty good scholar in arithmetic to tell how many stripes he had inflicted, and how many birch rods he had worn out, during all that time, in his fatherly tenderness for his pupils. Almost all the great men of that period, and for many years back, had been whipped into eminence by Master Cheever. Moreover, he had written a Latin accidence, which was used in schools more than half a century after his death, so that the good old man, even in his grave, was still the cause of trouble and stripes to idle school boys. Grandfather proceeded to say, that, when Master Cheever died, he bequeathed the chair to the most learned man that was educated at his school, or that had ever been born in America. This was the renowned Cotton Mather, minister of the Old North Church in Boston. "An author of the Magnalia, grandfather, which we sometimes see you reading," said Lawrence. "Yes, Lawrence," replied grandfather. "The Magnalia is a strange, pedantic history, in which true events and real personages move before the reader, with the dreamy aspect which they wore in Cotton Mather's singular mind. This huge volume, however, was written and published before our chair came into his possession. But, as he was the author of more books than there are days in the year, we may conclude that he wrote a great deal, while sitting in this chair.